Hello and welcome to this video. And today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite subject matters, two of my favorite subject matters actually, astrology and books. And then putting them together and just giving you what my favorite astrology books are and have been. The ones that have perhaps influenced me, the ones that I keep referring back to, the ones that have had an impact over my life. And because there is an array of astrology books out there, and most of them I've got. So I'm a big collector of astrology books. But these, the ones I've chosen, the ones that I do refer back to, or the ones that become important in my journey and my understanding of astrology and my basic philosophy of astrology. So these, and in no particular order, there's not like a top 10 or anything like that, but just an insight if you're learning astrology and which books have been just a big influence on me. So let's start off by the first book. And I picked this book because it's a book that was really kind of important to me very early on. And this is when I started really studying astrology, which is in the early 1990s. And it's important because really for sentimental reasons more than anything is the big thing. And it's called The Astrologer's Handbook by Francis Siokan and Lewis Aker. And as you can see, it's a very battered version. And I must have got this in around about 1991. I think the cover's very sort of early 90s. And these two astrologers, originally, I think it was published in the early 70s. It's definitely got that 70s feel about, first published in Great Britain in 1974. Definitely got that very esoteric, spiritual development. It talks about the planetary aspects from the astral worlds, the clairvoyant aspect of the planets. So it's got that real impact that says to me, right, okay, this is a book that's not just about, it's a cookbook, astrology cookbook, but also it talks on a sort of more spiritual or new age nuance about it, and it has those things impacting it. So it's a really, really good read. As I say, it's like it's an astrology cookbook. Your sun's in this sign, or this is the aspect between these two planets and how they relate to you. So really, I love this book. I don't refer to it as much as I used to at all, but it was a real kind of staple diet for me when learning about astrology. And what I did really like about it was the fact that it had these sort of spiritual concepts that were added in as well. ESP, clairvoyance, dreams, astral experiences. And it's very much of his time, but I still really, really like it. It's one of my favorites. And of course, this book's well over 30 years old now, my copy anyway. So worth a read. Okay, so next one, this astrologer's had an impact on astrology hugely, particularly in the 20th century, on psychological astrology, because there's many different types of astrology, and humanistic astrology, particularly a branch. And really quite a challenge to read at first. But Dane Rudhyar, The Astrology of Personality. And this was written in the late 1930s. So when I say it's hard to read, it's hard to read. It's a challenge, quite dense. But he's like the godfather of modern astrology. And although it's a challenge to read, I think that's kind of what makes it in some respects, because it is so challenging to read. You kind of really have to really kind of read it. And it's one of those that you sort of go back to and looking upon it again. He's coming from a very philosophical angle as well as a psychological, humanistic. Because he was a musician as well as an astrologer, I think, and an artist, I think he kind of comes in with that kind of viewpoint when you really kind of get into it. And, he talks about cycles a lot, day signs, night signs. I love a lot of Dane Rudhyar's work. The Pulse of Life is another one of my favorites. And his big concept, that's what I really like about Dane Rudhyar. He's got these big concepts, the big cycles that he really kind of puts into his writing. And so it's a really good read. As I said, a little bit challenging, but this is a good sort of way to start the astrology of the personality. The reformation of astrology concepts, ideas, in terms of contemporary psychology and philosophy. That is the subtitle. So he's really, really good. And I got into Dane Rudhyar around about late 90s, early 2000s, and he definitely made an impact on my astrology thinking. Maybe not so much now, but definitely has. I can definitely sense my astrological practice and what I do still has a lot of connections to Rudhyar's work, so well worth getting into. Okay, this particular next book, I think she's a British astrologer. I don't know much about her, to be honest, but it's a book I picked up quite early on in my astrology practice and learning about astrology. And again, it's one I still dip into, actually, and that's the Astrology of Karma by Pauline Stone. I don't think it's been republished. This comes out in the 80s. I love this book because it's great for the outer planets, but also it gives a very practical advice about how to deal with certain natal aspects between planets, certain transits, including working with Bach flower remedies, which I'm always a big fan of. And I like the way she writes. It's really good, and she looks at the challenges of working with particular planets. She looks at how to respond. She looks at certain houses, like the eighth house she goes into in connection with the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto particularly, and she does the work on Saturn. And so what I like about this is it's not just a kind of a cookbook. It gives you a way of responding and reacting and seeing the challenges that lie ahead and how you can overcome and benefit and learn from the experience of the aspect that you're having or the transit you're having. And that's what I really like about this. It's a really practical guide. And, again, it's a bit of its time, probably a lot of people would think, but I really kind of like that. I'm waiting for modern astrology to come back in a way. So it's really good on Pluto. Really like her work. She did another piece on relationships astrology, another book on relationships astrology, which I think I've got somewhere around. But this one, I do like that book. Okay. Right. Next one is Robert Hand. He, for me, has done so much for astrology in the last sort of 50 years. And this book is, as you can see, a book. My copy is being used well. Planets in Transit, Robert Hand. Again, just the transits and what to expect. And I love his writing. Again, this was written, I think, in the late 70s. It may even be earlier than that. Let me just check. Yeah, it was 1976. Yeah. So this book for me, great. Again, cookbook style, what to expect, certain transits. There's lots of transit books around, but I love this one. I love Robert Hand's the way that he writes. And the way he conveys, and his writing's changed over the years as well, and you can see that. But it's just one to refer on. And this is when you're learning astrology, and you particularly learn about transits. This is a good book to sort of learn about the interplay between two planets and how that would play out and affect. This is fantastic. So really worth getting hold of still. Okay. Another author of mine, again, way back in the 70s here, Steve Arroy. and Astrology, Psychology of Four Elements. I love his Astrology Karma and Transformation book. That's a real favorite. But I picked this because, the elements are, I don't think, talked about enough, particularly in modern astrology. In traditional astrology now, they are talked about a lot more. But I love this because the elements are very basic principle of astrology thinking, but actually really kind of work. I always say, when someone's in their own element, you're talking about the element they were born under. And it's great. What I love about Stephen Aurora is that he works from a counselling point of view as well, from an astrological counselling point of view, and has that counselling background. And so the way that he conveys in language is very therapeutic, which I really kind of like. And all of his books are fantastic. He did a book on relationships, as I said, Astrology, Karma, and Transformation is one of my favorites. But this one's really a good one for the elements, and as I say, the psychology of the elements. Okay. Next one, another psychological astrologer that's been a big influence, and that's Howard Sasporotus, and his book, The Gods of Change. Love his work, as well as Liz Green's as well. I haven't put Liz Green in here, but she's definitely one that I would put in there if I had the time. But this book is great, Understanding the Outer Planets. I class myself as a modern astrologer who uses traditional techniques, and the outer planets I love working with, and I think that understanding them, particularly, because the outer planets for me, they work very, very strongly in terms of timings and stuff like that. And this is great. It's got some stories, some background stories of clients. It gives really good descriptions of the outer planets. From a collective and an individual point of view. He's a great writer, fantastic writer, and him and Liz Green have done some fantastic lectures and books on those lectures. And this is just this book, The Gods of Change, is one of my favorites. Okay, I'm going back to Robert Hand, of course. Horoscope Symbols. I have to say that for me, this is, if you learn about astrology, I think it's just worth getting this book. It really is good for the description of the zodiac signs, for the planets. And, I got into this kind of quite late, actually. I think it was sort of 2005 I got this book. Obviously, I had planets and transits before that. This is 1981, but it's fantastic. It's fantastic because it's got a lot of philosophical elements to it, but also it's not a disservice to it at all. But it has a very simplistic way of putting the zodiac signs and their responses to situations, which I really, really like. And I just think it's a brilliant, in terms of just knowing about astrology, the core meanings. It talks about midpoints as well. And although, a lot of the stuff that he uses in this, I don't use in my own astrology now, it's a really good read. Really good read. I'm a big fan. Okay. And only a few more. Okay. The next book, this is from the traditional point of view. This astrologer has been, in the last 10 years, really helped astrology grow, I think, particularly on the internet, and it's just been a brilliant service and done some amazing work in making his astrology like it is now, as popular it is. I think he's one of the sort of pioneers of that, and that's Chris Brennan and his work, Hellenistic Astrology. It's great. It's a great read on traditional astrology, the history of it, and the practice as well. It goes into perfectionist Time Lord system, zodiacal releasing. I just think he's done a really good job. It's a book I refer to a lot, and I think he's been fantastic for astrology in general, and his podcast is for me, really, really worth listening to, and the astrologers he has on. And this book is fantastic. And I love the fact that it starts by giving the history behind it, and traditional Hellenistic astrology, particularly, and then the sort of the whole sign house system he goes into, and how he uses sort of practices, like I said, perfections and stuff like that, and gives examples and example charts. So it's really, really good. And he talks about sect, all of that. And if you want to learn about traditional or Hellenistic astrology, this for me is the book to go to. Very good read. Okay. My next book is more of a philosophical concept about astrology as a divination, and how that's influenced my thinking in terms of, to me, astrology is an act of a divination. You're working with the divine, and this is explored in the idea of this book by Geoffrey Cornelius, which is The Moment of Astrology. Really good read. It mainly borders and uses examples of a horary astrology, but for me, it just resonates so much, because as an astrologer, you go through different kind of cycles as an astrologer, and questioning your astrology practice, which you should do. You should always be doing that. And there is something between the astrologer and the client that happens in between that is divine, that special place. And he talks about that, and of course the moment of astrology, that moment, whether it is asking a question in a horary, or the moment that someone is born into this world, and how important that is. And it explores these themes historically, gives some really good examples as well, and just gives a real background as to more to do with the philosophy of astrology, or where it comes from, and how things are interpreted, and symbolism and semiotics and all this kind of really very, very good read. And I do reread bits as well. Okay, so that leads me on to the next book, which is Christian Astrology. Before I go to my last book, Christian Astrology by William Lilly, 17th century English astrologer. And it's written at that time, the 17th century, so it's a bit challenging at first, but oh my god, it's a book that I keep rereading and dipping into. This is books 1 and 2, which is the horary section. Book 3 is more to do with natal, but this is, I do quite a lot of horary work, and so this is the book to go to. This is the book to look at. It just conjures up this kind of really nice imagery as well. It puts astrology in a kind of mystical overtones when I read this, but it's very practical. He gives some examples of charts here, which is really good to use and to look at. And that's good if you look at his actual charts that he's done in this book, and actually follow the instructions and stuff like that. You get a lot from that. So one of my favorites. And then the last one, probably my favorite of all of them actually, is my ephemeris. That's the one I use the most. I still use an ephemeris for all my work, because even though it's all done computer systems, drawing up charts, I was lucky enough to learn how to draw up a chart and do that at the early days. But the ephemeris is the timetable for us astrologers, and gives where the planets are. And it always refer back to, particularly with retrogrades, you can just look at, basically where things are going, if a planet's going backwards, forwards, and when it moves forwards, when it moves direct, when it's going stationary. So this is probably my favorite book, because it's the one I use the most. So that's a little insight into some of my books, astrology books that have influenced me. And if you did like the video, press the like button, and please become a subscriber of the channel. And thank you very much for watching.